something very sophisticated.
Any idea what kind of EM weaponry?
No, but we're looking more closely at what's available now. For example, on her website, drjudywood.com, Judy's added now a new appendix about multiple kinds of weapons in the laser families. We've discovered there's a 747 mounted version that has tremendous potential to deliver from the air. And of course, the use of satellites, even for reflective purposes, has always been a serious possibility. In 1991, an experiment was conducted with a low-intensity laser reflected off of a mirror in space and came back and hit its target on Earth. So this has been around for quite a while. We're not the only ones to explore this, by the way. I mean, Judy wasn't the first, though I think she's been the most thorough. Webster Tarpley, for example, in his book Synthetic Terror, in discussing the massive demolition, pulverization of Twin Towers, discusses the possibility that a directed energy weapon may have been involved there, and refers to the work of Jim Hoffman. In later's book, Webster talks about the possibility that the plane in Pennsylvania was taken down using a chemical laser. So considering how mainstream Webster is regarded by the 9/11 community, to me it seems to me very unfair that Judy should be somehow isolated, and I detect more than a sexism involved here. Well, there are many ways to try to smear somebody. I mean, even a phrase can do it, like talking about space beams or death rays.
Right.
You know, that's just about enough. And, you know, if you stop and realize, my God, we've been working on this stuff for decades. This has been a priority of the Air Force, to develop space-based weapons that will allow us to control the Earth from space. Well, you can't do that unless they have devastating power. And that's what they've developed, and we haven't been let in on the secret.
Right. And have you heard anything specifically about the weaponry used in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Yeah, there was a very interesting report, along with an interview with General Myers and Donald Rumsfeld, where Rumsfeld was being asked by reporters whether they would ever reach into their arsenal of weapons in production, in research stage, and use them. And Rumsfeld was acknowledging, yeah, sometimes you might have a problem where you want back into your research inventory, even though it's not really fully developed, and see what you can do with it. And at this point, General Myers is actually trying to cut him off from talking any further about this. I think Myers thought there were hazards in going in this direction. But in the course of the same interview, there's discussion about, for example, a vehicle, I take it was a Volkswagen bus, wilting like a damp cloth. And all the occupants were killed, but the reports from those who were witnessing this said that they didn't hear a sound, there were no bullets, no noise, it just wilted. And this seems to me very consistent with the toasted car phenomenon as we have been exploring it in relation to the WTC.
Right. And in Lebanon, doctors are finding people with holes in their bodies and some very strange, they can't explain what happened to these people.
That's right. I think what you're talking about is just exactly what the Russian general observed, namely that the military-industrial complex wants to try out these whole new families of weapons to convince the Department of Defense that they work so they can get these $100 billion contracts.
Not just testing, but demonstration.
On live subjects, right, which, of course, the Health and Human Services wouldn't approve in the United States. Though there have been reports about the military using microwave weapons to maintain crowd control, and how this makes your skin feel as though you're on fire, but allegedly does no lasting damage. The fact that they haven't conducted the tests, however, indicates they don't in fact know it does no lasting damage, which is why they want to conduct the tests.
But they have. They call it non-lethal weapon. They have.
That's right.
It's been on TV.
Non-lethal weaponry. Yeah, every now and then you get a breakthrough where you get a glimpse of some of this, what's going on.
Well, they got this TV show, Future Weapons. It's on almost every night.
Wonderful. Plus, it turned out, even when I was studying what had happened to Paul Wellstone, I became convinced that back in 2002 that they'd use a directed energy weapon to overwhelm the electrical system and cause the solenoids, these electrical switches that control the pitch of the props, to activate and put the props in idle, which meant, of course, that the plane had no forward thrust and would inevitably crash. I discovered that there's a whole professional society devoted to directed energy, and they were meeting then for, I think, the 8th year. They were meeting in Hawaii. So here you had, and if you read their website, It talked about all these kinds of weapons that can perform all of these kinds of feats. And I mean, you don't have a professional society for something that's in the planning stage. I mean, this is a real deal.
Well, so we don't have any specifics on what exactly, I mean, we just have guesswork on what exactly type of EM weapons, like you already said, the space-based programs. We don't have anything specific
what we have are effects that do not appear to be explainable on any other basis than some new kind of high-tech weapon. And notice the ingenuity.
Mid-air pulverization.
Notice the ingenuity in doing this. Yeah, it's the pulverization of the building, the thoroughness of that, but also that gouge in Building 6, the cookie cutter incisions in Building 5, 4 half gone, half intact, 3 that huge gouge. These are all very strange phenomena. And we have therefore a class of effects that seem to be inexplicable in the government's account or on the conventional explosive account. I just don't see any way they can explain them. Not to mention the toasted cars.
You know, people are going to ask, well, what about the debris falling off the buildings? Couldn't they have made the holes?
Yeah, but you may recall I mentioned in passing, you'd expect that to be a rather random phenomenon. You'd expect similar kinds of damage from all this debris, which was being blown in all directions, yeah. And you expect it to be very similar in the different buildings and that there would be a pattern there, and there is not. What you have are these very distinctive kinds of effects that seem to require a different explanation. So I think there are lots of reasons to raise questions about these things, and I don't understand why they shouldn't all be perfectly legitimate subjects for investigation. If somebody's bananas or off their nut, that'll show up. It's like Holocaust denial. Why should anyone get excited if someone wants to deny the Holocaust? No. I grew up in the 40s and the 50s where I was exposed to probably hundreds of newsreels showing emaciated bodies, stacks of corpses, the interior of crematoria and all that. So, I mean, I grew up with a mountain of evidence about the reality of the Holocaust. But if somebody wants to deny it, that's not going to bother me. I mean, anyone who conducts their own investigation is going to realize that that it was a bona fide phenomenon, though there's room for legitimate questions of disputing about the actual exact numbers, whether it's 6 million Jews or 12 million Jews, because there were a lot of others who were being exterminated too. And here's something else. When I was out in Chandler, the ridiculous claim was being made that we 9/11 critics were on a par with Holocaust deniers. But that's an absurdity if you stop and think about it. Holocaust deniers are denying that their government perpetrated mass murder on the level of genocide. 9/11 critics are affirming that their government committed mass murder. The situations from a logical point of view are precisely the opposite. There's no reassurance to be derived from drawing conclusions about your government having committed mass murder of your fellow citizens. And those suggested, as did one critic in the BBC special that was a hit piece on 9/11 researchers, he suggested that we derive some comfort as though it were a security blanket from this research. And I say, what could be more ridiculous? I mean, finding that your government has been abusing you and committing mass murder of your fellow citizens is quite unnerving. It's analogous to a woman who discovers evidence that her husband has been molesting their daughter. She may suppress it because she can't face the reality. Just because we're capable of facing the reality, which it seems to us is of the greatest importance in terms of sharing our findings with the American people so they'll know what kind of a government they really have here in this day and age. It seems to us not only the highest form of respect for those who died on 9/11, since their survivors are surely entitled to know how and why they died, but also something every American citizen should know in order to reappraise their attitude toward their own government.
And are you familiar with National Security Memorandum 200, the Kissinger Memorandum?
I'd have to be reminded of the context there.
It was a covert plan enacted into law under Ford in '75 to cull the human population.
Oh, well, yes, I have heard of this. And the fact is that the carrying capacity of the Earth is, what size of population the Earth can sustain indefinitely is a function of the quality of life you want that population to enjoy. a book on the subject concludes that if you wanted to have the Earth's population enjoy the quality of life of the average American, let's back it up to a few years before Bush came into power, because our quality of life has been diminishing ever since. Then the max population that the Earth could sustain at that quality of life is around 2 billion. We have, in fact, a population about 4.5. So there are rumors and speculation about documents and records of this kind where there's a grand plan to reduce the size of the Earth's population dramatically. And I can only say, if so, this is a horrendous scheme. What we need are methods like birth control and sex education and Planned Parenthood that are responsible ways to bring the Earth's population into balance with its carrying capacity, not mass murder on a scale unprecedented in the history of the human species.
Right. I can't explain it. I mean, maybe they like control. Chomsky says that if we educate women and we reduce poverty, the birth rate drops.
That's right. And when women know more about how their own body functions, I've actually recently...
They choose not?
Choose not to have children. I've actually recently authored a book entitled Render Unto Darwin, in which I am analyzing philosophical aspects of the Christian right's crusade against science. And I not only discuss their attitude toward evolution versus creation science, intelligent design, and so forth, but also toward stem cell research, cloning, and abortion. And I suggest, among other policies, that women ought to just make it uniform that they not have sex with a man unless he will agree that if she should incur an unintended pregnancy, that she has the right to determine what happens with her own body. So I adopt Nancy Reagan's slogan, and I say, in the absence of a man's willingness to commit himself to such an agreement, she should just say no.
On the idea of culling the population, there's a lot of theories about chemtrails. Have you looked into chemtrails much?
I'm very bothered by chemtrails. I've heard a half a dozen different explanations, all of which bother me profoundly. Some suggest it's a way of warding off global warming by reflecting the sun's rays back into space. Some say it's actually creating a container to exacerbate global warming by keeping heat contained toward the surface of the Earth. Some say it's spreading a kind of funny kind of bacillus that is a weird kind of life that infests human bodies with little creatures with follicle life. Yeah, it's really weird. This chemtrail thing is strange. I'll just say the government has to be involved here, otherwise it would have investigated and exposed what's going on. It's got to be something that's sanctioned by the government.
The most plausible theory that I've up on is that it's enhancing the HAARP program's
I've also heard that it's creating a kind of reflective surface in the atmosphere that can be used to propagate energy in relation to HAARP, and that's not implausible. I would like to know what it is. I think that the American people aren't being told is another form of creeping fascism, that the United States is not the country it used to be. And that, sometimes I speculate that if the only way to stop the aggressive development of this country is by some kind of economic collapse, maybe that's what it's going to take.
And how do you explain Chomsky's lack of ability to 9/11?
I've been profoundly disturbed by Noam Chomsky's role as a public intellectual because while he's been wonderful at the intermediate range of issues, and he'll frequently offer devastating critiques of the government, when it comes to the mega issues, the ones that are truly of historic importance, such as the assassination of John F. Kennedy or the events of 9/11, he somehow suddenly can't see the evidence, he can't appreciate policy implications, he doesn't think there's anything to it. And I can assure you that he is as wrong could be. Indeed, in a book I co-authored on the death of Paul Wellstone, I made a point during the comparisons I was elaborating about how the government fakes evidence and covers things up, how Chomsky had played a role here in not recognizing the major policy issues involved with JFK, which included wanting to abolish the Federal Reserve, cutting the oil depletion allowance, getting rid of, even abolishing the CIA, not invading Cuba, pulling our troops out of Vietnam. I mean, we're talking about some of the most important policy issues of our time. And yet Noam Chomsky has said that even if there was a conspiracy to kill him, since so far as he can see it had no policy ramifications, it's not important even if it took place. He ought to have a lot of things to say about these, but he does not, which has caused me to look at Chomsky in a different way, not only as an intellectual in relation to his work on linguistics, but also as an intellectual in the public arena, where it seems to me he has acutely downed the American people by failing to fulfill a responsibility we had grown accustomed to his exercising. In my opinion, an utter disgrace.
He's pretty much stayed away from false flag operations, except for a very few, or a few in third world countries.
Well, I can only tell you with regard to my evaluation of what he had to say about 9/11 and JFK, it's been utterly inadequate, morally irresponsible, and in my opinion, a flagrant failure to fulfill the duties he assumes as a public intellectual.